On today's Locked On Jayhawks, Brian Borland retires. KU as a new defensive coordinator. Did they make the right hire?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, Blue Sky Derek Johnson, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, and find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be breaking down the new defensive coordinator position for KU because their current guy has retired. Their new guy has been promoted into the system. So we're going to break down what went down. We're going to break down what KU has in DK McDonald, and then we'll finish up as well because, you know, if you caught any of our bonus episodes, thank you to you, but also there was a lot that went on over this past week with players transferring, the players coming back, coaching moves, and we're going to recap it all in case you missed any of it on this episode of the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, let's start right here. So the news from the day, among many other coaching news, it's very apparent that Lance Leipold is somebody who likes to work quick, that he wants to get resolutions to things quickly, which I think is a good trait to have. I think that's a good thing to do as a head coach, right? You don't want things lingering. You don't want questions in recruiting. Who's going to be the coach? What's going to happen here? Especially in today's day and age with the transfer portal, who's going to be coaching me, right? That's an important trait to have, to be able to make decisive and quick decisions. And that's part of the thing that's difficult as a coach, that you get judged on those quick decisions that you have to make probably faster than you would like, but that's also why you make millions and millions of dollars. So here's what went down. Kansas head coach Lance Leipold announced that Brian Borland is retiring from coaching. He's going to be succeeded by DK McDonald, who is the co-defensive coordinator. Jordan Peterson leaves last year for Texas A&M. They hired DK McDonald. We'll get into his coaching background, but he was most recently at Iowa State and with the Philadelphia Eagles. They hired him to be the cornerbacks coach and be the co-defensive coordinator. The fact that they gave him the co-defensive coordinator title, now maybe that was just something that was required to get him to take the job. Maybe that was, partially about a money involvement thing, that with that title comes a bigger, payday again to get him to take the job. But maybe also part of this was the idea, part of the plan was that he was going to be the defensive coordinator in waiting. Now, that was never like publicized in any way, but maybe that was kind of a handshake agreement. Like, hey, if you do well, there's a good chance that, you're going to be the eventual defensive coordinator here. You look at Brian Borland, he obviously is getting a little bit older in the coaching days, not necessarily like he's not to a point where it's like, oh, he has to retire. Like, he could have still coached for another handful of years age-wise and been totally fine. But he had the health thing that went on last year that caused him to miss the first game, Jordan Peterson calling plays instead of him. And so you wonder if it was more of interest for him to be like, I'm going to retire and move on. Also, in addition to that, his contract was up at the end of this season. So Kansas would have had to extend him, and maybe it was just one of those situations where for Kansas, you go, yeah, the defense kind of plateaued from this year to last year. It's probably best for all parties involved. Like, we might be wanting to go in another direction anyway, but obviously Lance Leipold and Brian Borland very close. They've worked together for so many years. In the time at Buffalo, like, Brian Borland was actually a more successful coordinator. If you look at where their defense is ranked, like, the defense actually ranked higher if you look at like points or per game or points allowed per game. The defense ranked better than the offense did in a majority of the seasons there. So had a successful career with them overall, and that it's kind of that, hey, let's retire here. Let's not leave on bad blood or anything like that, right? So he spent 4 seasons as the Kansas defense coordinator, all 4 in Lance Leipold's time here at Kansas. He was 6 seasons at Buffalo with Leipold, and in total, 18 seasons for Borland with Lance Leipold. Between Wisconsin, Whitewater, he was his first defensive coordinator. Jim Zabrowski was his first offensive coordinator. Brian Borland was his first defensive coordinator at Whitewater. Goes to Buffalo, then KU, and 40 seasons of coaching in total for him. Like, it is a long career. I know it doesn't end the way KU fans wanted it to, and obviously there are some questions. And I had questions over the course of the season about why are they doing this, or I like it when they're more aggressive, or why are you playing corners off the ball too much, yada yada yada. But the overall is, if we are looking big picture what Brian Borland did, He took a defense that was giving up over 40 points per game in his first year, and he leaves the program in a situation where they were giving up 26 points per game this year. So, yes, it feel like the defense plateaued from this year to last year, and that maybe you had questions about, well, what is the ceiling of what this defense can be? Those are all totally fair. But if we're also being fair, Brian Borland raised the floor and where this program is at on the defense side of the ball, right? It's the players too, and it's other things. But like, he did contribute to that. You can't just say like it's one thing or another. So credit to him for that. But I think this is also the right time to maybe try to take that next step on the defensive end of the football field. And here's why. You look at the points allowed per game. Again, 42.2 points allowed per game in 2021. That was 129th in the country. Then 2022, he gives up 35.5 points per game. So he improved by a touchdown, but that's still 124th in the country. 2023 gets even better. 26.5 points per game allowed, 67th in the country. But then this year, they actually gave up less points per game this year, 26.0, but the ranking was worse. So if you look at points per game allowed, you would say, oh, they still got a little bit better this year. But the points per game ranking went from 67th in 2023 to 76th in 2024. So if you're comparing it nationally, but regardless, that is kind of around the same total of what you're giving up. But then when you look at the yards allowed per play, 2021, 7.4 yards allowed per play. That was 128th. 2022, 6.3 yards allowed per play. That was 120th. So they improved. 2023, you get to 5.6 yards allowed per play. That's 74th. This year, it went down to 6.1 yards allowed per play. That is 104th in the country in yards allowed per play. And that's with even having two all Big 12 first team, multiple time selection corners and having some talent. And yes, is this the deepest defensive talent team in the conference? No. Is this a team loaded with NFL draft picks on the defensive side? No. Is the linebacking core one that you're going to write home about? No, but like, they have enough pieces there that they should be better than the 104th best defense in the country, especially a 30 ranking drop in yards allowed per play. So things just kind of plateaued from last year to this year. And yes, you could say, well, they lose Austin Booker and yada, yada, but you still had a lot of players back. And like I said, I think you give credit to Brian Borland for helping get this defense up to a higher floor for the next guy to take over. But also, I think this is the right move to kind of move forward and get a fresh eyes on thing, whether it's modernizing things or, I don't know, just a difference in aggressiveness or play calling. We don't exactly know what it's going to look like formation-wise, what's going to be different. Brian Borland was running kind of a 4-3 defense that at times became kind of a 4-2-5 defense with three safeties. At other times, that, it's kind of a 4-3 where there's a third linebacker. At other times, it maybe was a 4-2-5 with another corner in there. So we'll see what the new guy does, and I want to get into that coming up on the other side. You're listening to Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code College. With 5 generations of experience, they deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. I'm saving your Christmas right now. You might not know what to get somebody. You might be like, oh no, I have to do this last minute Christmas shopping. Omaha Steaks, baby. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide. 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com, OMAHA steaks.com, and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, continuing on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, thanks for making it your first listen every day. You can check out our KU Missouri recap or some of our other coaching or player news, or we'll get into a recap of it later in this episode. But if you want a more detailed approach, check out those videos and check out Locked On College Football. Get you ready for the playoff and bowl season here as well. Okay, so the new hire, Brian Borland out, retiring. DK McDonald is the new defensive coordinator for KU. So he was previously on staff this past season. And I think this is very interesting because it continues a trend where Lance Leipold promotes from within. Now, this can work two ways. I think it is a healthy work environment when you consistently promote from within. Think about it. You might be at a job somewhere where they don't ever promote. and maybe you're getting a little bothered by it at work, right? And you're like, man, I wish I had somewhere I could go a little bit more vertically, right? It's a good thing. It creates a healthy workplace that they promote from within, that you feel like when you accomplish something, that you feel like when you work hard, you were rewarded for that. I think that's a very good thing that Lance Leipold does. There is a line, though, where it's like, you still do have to interview other candidates, get different scopes on things, get different opinions, right? Maybe the best coach isn't the guy who's in your own building necessarily, especially for a KU defense that did struggle to relative to probably what the talent was in the secondary in this year's team. So like, there's a line there where you like to promote that, but that doesn't mean you have to do it each and every time. And I definitely think this one gets a little bit more heat. Like I think, maybe you were leaning Matt Lubick over Jim Zebrowski. Maybe you had your favorite offensive coordinator were leaning, but I think for the most part, the pulse of KU fans is that Jim Zebrowski, you're happy with that hire, being an internal promotion. This one seems to be a little bit more polarizing with DK McDonald. And I think part of it, maybe he hasn't been around Kansas as long to see the successes, right? It's easy to point Jim Zebrowski on his staff at Wisconsin Whitewater. It's easy to point to the staff when he joined Buffalo, that Andy Kotelnicki and the Buffalo offense struggled the first 2 years. But then when Zebrowski joined year 3 and on is when they really took off. It's easy to point to the bowl game and say, look at what he did in the bowl game on the offensive side. You don't have that as much with DK McDonald. So it becomes more of a little bit of an unknown there on the defensive side of the ball. But this is a guy, he played at Edenboro from 1997 to 2000, then was the DB's coach there later for a couple years. Eventually he moves up the ranks. He got his first, I believe William and Mary is a D1 job at the FCS level in 2011. Then he becomes the corners coach for Toledo from 2012 to 2015. Then he gets the Iowa State cornerback and pass game coordinator job from 2016 to 2018. He then becomes the safeties coach and pass game coordinator job. I don't know if that's defensive pass game coordinator for Iowa State from 2019 to 2020. And when I think about Iowa State defenses, I think about having some really salty defenses and not necessarily they typically have good corners who go on to the NFL. And, we've seen the occasional other player like Will McDonald, for instance, was a first round pick for them. But they don't typically have just a cacophony of 5-star recruits, 4-star recruits coming into that defense that is littering it. And they typically have really good defenses, and they have a very, cutting edge scheme that a lot of other teams have tried to kind of replicate from here moving forward. And so that becomes interesting that he has that background in there for a handful of seasons, if he can bring some of that stuff over. Because think about if you had, maybe not full what Iowa State's been defensively these last handful of seasons, which is like consistently one of the best defenses in the conference. But think about if you could bring some of that, if you could bring 90% of that to this Kansas team with where the offense has been recently. Like, that would be quite the recipe for success, don't you think? So anyway, he goes from Iowa State, then goes to the Philadelphia Eagles for 2021 to 2022, where he was the assistant DB coach. Now, that's where things get a little bit sticky, because when he's at Iowa State, they're doing so well on the defensive end of the ball. When he gets to Philadelphia, things did not go well on the defensive end of the ball, and specifically in the secondary. Now, in the NFL, I guess this is true to every level of sports, but like in the NFL specifically, sometimes you only have so much control, because in college, it's like, oh, if you don't have good enough players in the secondary, go recruit better players, go to the transfer portal. In the NFL, to a certain extent, it's like, well, we have this salary cap limits. We're only drafting late in the draft. Like, there's only so much we can do. So how much of that was that? I don't know. But they certainly struggled at that end. Anyway, he gets the Philadelphia Eagles DB job 2023, 2021 to 2022. They were good on defense. But 2023, when he was the DB's coach, was when they certainly struggled at the back end and on defense. But again, was that him? Was that the players, right? It's not entirely sure to know. It's like, you could be the best quarterbacks coach in the world. And I think you look at like Garrett Riley, the brother of Lincoln Riley. He was offensive coordinator, or I forget what position coach he was at KU. It's not like everybody was sitting there when he was at KU going, man, we got to hire this guy away. Like look what he's doing with the quarterbacks at KU. And then all of a sudden he goes to TCU and they're playing for a national championship, and he becomes the hottest coordinator out there, and Clemson prize him away, and yada, yada, yada. Right. So like, the players do matter there, right? It might not have been DK McDonald's fault, but it is an interesting note and discussion. So then he takes over with Kansas this past season, becomes the co-defensive coordinator. To what level was he, involved in the defensive game planning? Was that just a title thing, as we talked about earlier? And he was the cornerbacks coach as well. Now, by all accounts, it sounds like he was somebody who approached the corners from a very professional level, that with Kobe Bryant, Melo Dotson, he treated them, because they wanted to be NFL players, professionals. He treated them that way and held them very accountable. And that could be a good thing. They're holding these guys accountable to that level. Now, it's hard when you distinguish because you can look at it and say, again, going back to the player's idea, did DK McDonald have a great season as cornerbacks coach because Melo Dotson and Kobe Bryant were both first team all Big 12 corners? You could easily point to it. Or you could also point to it and say they were both that the year before. It is just about the players, and you just kind of drove the Ferrari. You didn't crash it. You could also say, oh, well, the defense should have been better knowing you had those, and there was too much off coverage. But how much of that was him? How much of that was the play calling with Brian Borland? So it's very convoluted and complicated to exactly pinpoint, to what level DK McDonald, this isn't baseball where I can point to him and be like, Shohei Ohtani had a 7 WAR. He contributed to 7 wins above replay. I have no idea, and it's impossible to know. And that's what becomes a little bit difficult here, because I think a lot of people saw Jordan Peterson, going back to the idea with Jim Zebrowski. We have tangible stuff about what he did as offensive coordinator. We saw a game with him play calling. We saw that with Jordan Peterson a little bit last year. We saw the recruiting impact that Jordan Peterson had, that he was available last year. And I think a lot of Kansas fans are sitting there going, man, I wish you would have brought in Jordan Peterson instead. And Jordan Peterson, to be clear, I don't know. He might not have accepted the job. Like, for all we know, Lance Leipold did offer him the job and he didn't accept it. And then they went to DK McDonald. I don't know. Or maybe they did. Now, if they did go to DK McDonald before going to Jordan Peterson, I think that would be a mistake. When you look at Peterson, his recruiting background, now spending a year in A&M, and they typically have really good defenses, or Mike Elko typically has really good defenses, like being around him for a year would probably be really good. That would, I think, have been a home run hire. You probably get DJ Warner to come back out of the portal if you bring Jordan Peterson with you. So I think that would have been the home run hire, and I think that's what a lot of KU fans wanted. I also think even some KU fans would have been cool if you went, out of the internal here, basically. And maybe for Lance Leipold, going back to the idea, that is something that he usually emphasizes, right? Promoting from within. And probably he also saw Jeff Grimes being an external hire last year, and that not working as much as they hoped for. And maybe that spurned him a little bit. I don't think you can let one thing like that, deter you from everything in the future. Again, for all we know, he did offer it to Peterson, and then that's kind of a moot point. But I think it's an uninspiring move, while also being one that could end up being the right move, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think this is a bad move. I don't think it's the wrong move necessarily. I just think it's a TBD move, right? It's a to be determined move. And in a real sense, every move you make is that, but there is so much less information on this that makes it really hard to diagnose. And, it's very easy to be like, oh, this guy had a lower job than he's going to have now. He gets a promotion on a defense that ranked outside of the top 100 in yards allowed per play, that ranked outside of the top 70 in points allowed per game. Why is he getting promoted? I will say, I've made a lot of cross-sport references in this, so let's do another one. JJ Piccolo was the assistant GM before Dayton Moore ends up getting fired, and then JJ Piccolo gets promoted. And that was the same thing, wasn't it? In theory, it was, oh, this team's not doing well enough. The front office isn't doing well enough. Wait, so you're going to hire from within that same front office? Seems to work out pretty well for the Royals and where they've gone so far. So it's entirely possible DK McDonald will have, and that becomes the thing. Like, what are they going to play? Are they going to play that Iowa State defense, which is playing like a 3-3-5, 3-2-6 at times, like where it's caused a lot of problems for opposing offenses? I would be all for that, but that's going to cause a major change in recruiting, in what KU wants to do with some of their defensive linemen, like in the types of DBs KU is bringing in. It might take a little bit of time for KU to find the fits to that. Is he going to do a mix, for a year or two? Is he going to run 3-4? Is it going to be, right? Like, what exactly is the defense going to look like? How aggressive is he going to be? Is he going to be way more aggressive than Brian Borland? Are there going to be way more blitzes? Is it going to be more man coverage, more cover 3, more, right? It'll be very interesting, and we don't have, again, unlike Jim Zebrowski, much track record that it's hard to know. Now, as far as the defense he takes over, he's certainly going to have his hands full. I actually like what the defensive line could look like for KU next year, even losing DJ Warner. By Job, if he can take a step, basically between By Job, Dak Brinkley, if one of those two can take a step forward, I think you'll feel pretty good, because you have Dean Miller back, all Big 12 second team at defensive end. You're bringing in 2 interesting freshmen, in Garrett Martin and Adrian Hawley. Now, ideally, they don't hit the field right away in year 1. And then if Dylan Brooks can come back healthy enough on the defensive end. Now, they'll probably have to add more, because that's a thin group right now, but there's at least some interesting pieces there. Defensive tackle I like. DJ Withers, Tommy Dunn, Keenan Caldwell, Blake Harold, all guys who we saw flashes from this year. You add Gage Keys back, plus Marcus Calvin working into another year, freshman and Josiah Hammond. I feel good about where the D-line is. The corners, even losing Mello and Kobe, if you're hiring a defense coordinator who cuts his teeth there, then you should be okay because you have talent with Demarius McGee, Jalen Todd, Jameel Croft. I mean, you're bringing in these like high-end 3-star, low-end 4-star recruits and Jacoby Davis, Andre Gibson, Austin Alexander, Chris McCorkle. So I feel good there. Linebacker is the one where they have work to do right now for sure in the portal. Maybe they can add another safety, but you have the Dye brothers back as seniors. You have Taylor Davis, who we saw get a lot of playing time at the end. I think Mason Ellis has deserved a chance to get some real playing time. So there are some questions. They lost a lot of players, but if they can shore up linebacker specifically, I do think there is enough there that you can at least become interesting this season, and we'll see what the new defensive coordinator is all about. All right, let's continue on a little recap of the wild week that was, in case you missed it, for KU football. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. You can join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode of the show, and we will have later this week the biggest things KU football still needs to accomplish in the offseason. We're going to have a KU football transfer portal roundup of guys that they've offered so far, and get into a quick scouting reports on some of the players on the offense and defense side of the ball for some of the targets. We'll have a KU NC State basketball preview, so plenty more coming at you right here this week on Locked On Jayhawks. And the way things have been going, we'll probably have like 5 breaking news things we'll have to break down. Who knows? Okay, so recap of what happened this last week. Let's start with this. Jalen Daniels is back for another season, so that's big for the KU offense, and certainly doesn't apply as much to the defense coordinator thing here, but it might, right? If Jalen Daniels can give you a higher floor or higher ceiling, whatever it is, it helps you on the defense side of the ball, right? Because then you have multiple ways that you can go about winning as a defense here, right? If the offense isn't very good, you just basically have to be stellar as a defense to win games. If the offense is really good for KU, there's options for DK McDonald, right? You can be just a good defense. That'd be the overall best opinion. But like at the very least, if you can be a turnover forcing defense or something, get the ball back for a good offense. So has a little bit of an impact there. The guy calling plays for Jalen Daniels is going to be Jim Zabrowski, former quarterbacks coach, as we've kind of mentioned throughout the show. He was promoted to OC. Jeff Grimes heading over to Wisconsin. I think KU fans very happy, and rightfully so with that move happening. And then the transfer portal came abound, and Gage Keys sounds like he's coming back into the program for KU, so DK McDonald having another defensive tackle to work with there, and what I actually think should be a pretty good D-tackle rotation this year. And then you had players leave, a couple DBs, Caleb Purdy and BJ Dilworth from DK McDonald's position, but seemed like they were kind of buried a little bit on the depth chart. And then you had Savion Morrison, who could have been the number 2, number 1 running back. I think it would have been LaShawn Williams, but then again, seems like the staff pretty high on Harry Stewart and Johnny Thompson. So maybe Savion Morrison, wouldn't have ended up being that guy anyway, but he ends up entering the portal. And then DJ Warner, that's the big one, the big gut punch to lose. KU's former highest rated high school recruit that they've ever gotten in the 24/7 sports recruiting era. That is a mouthful to say, but he ends up entering the transfer portal. And I was still holding out hope that, if they're able to go out and get Jordan Peterson as the DC, maybe he'll withdraw, come back to Kansas. But now that DK McDonald is the guy, I can't imagine that's going to happen with DJ Warner. So that is all the latest news in a quick recap. But if you want a more detailed recap of those things happening, what it exactly means for next year's team in the future, what's the future quarterback room look like, for instance, check those out. We have them on separate videos right here on Locked On Jayhawks on YouTube, or on separate podcasts as well, anywhere you get your podcast with Locked On Jayhawks. And that'll do it for today's episode of the show. We'll see you next time with LOJ.